Hello and welcome to Grouchy Geeks, episode 48. My name's Steve, my co-host is Scott.
Hello.
This is our continuing in lockdown episodes. The world is slowly coming back to normal, and so we're going to continue with our usual monthly focused on everything not related to the real world.
Exactly. The world's slowly going back to normal, but I'm going to do my best to never leave the house. So
have everything delivered to the door.
Exactly.
And never go out again.
Yeah.
Excellent. Right. So, shall we start with some news? What have you got?
Cool. So it's probably good that I'm starting because I've got a sad piece of news. But it was somebody that's died, unfortunately. But I don't think in the UK he was particularly a well-known person, which is why I wanted to mention him. I don't know if you know if the name Grant Imahara rings any bells to you.
No, it doesn't. Tell me about him.
Okay, so he's most well known for being on a US program called Mythbusters, which I suspect you probably have heard of.
I've heard of the show, yes.
So it's a bunch of geeks and engineers and sort of robotics experts and stuff like that that will go out to try and prove certain theories. It's really interesting. It's really fascinating. So they'll do things like, is it possible to build a flying car? And they'll just go and see if they can do it. And he was one of the Mythbusters team. But I first came across him because he played Sulu in Star Trek Continues, which is like a fan-made continuation of the original Star Trek series, with different people playing, Sulu and Spock and Kirk. But it went all out. They properly built all the sets and did all sorts of amazing stuff. So that's where I first came across him. Interestingly, he spent most of his career working for ILM. So he worked on Jurassic Park, the Star Wars prequels, Terminator 3, the Matrix films, and he just had an incredible career. And he was somebody that I think in the US, the announcement of his death probably went sort of quite far and wide. But over here, even though we're all geeks, I don't think he was a well-known name. And he died, so he was only 2 years older than me. So he died when he was 49 of a brain hemorrhage. So I thought he was worth mentioning. Yeah,
absolutely. I'm sure he'll be missed by his fans and friends and family. Bit of good news then. I don't know if you've seen this already, but Cobra Kai has been given a third series, and this is a TV series which continues from the original Karate Kid saga. And it was originally done by YouTube when they were doing their creative original content, which they decided to move into. They did a handful of shows, and now they've decided to come out of that game again. And so Netflix have taken on Cobra Kai. Season 1 and 2 will be coming to Netflix on August the 28th, ahead of the third season of Cobra Kai. We're not sure when that's coming out yet. It's date to be released. I suspect it'll be later this year. But now is the time, from the end of August. If you have not seen the first 2 seasons of Cobra Kai, you need to binge them, get through them because they're brilliant. They're absolutely amazing. And then look forward to season 3, probably in a few months after that.
Yeah, so as somebody that's watched it, the brilliant news for me is that there's going to be a season 3. But I would imagine for almost every single person listening to this, the good news is that you'll actually get to watch it from the very beginning, because to me it kind of seemed to be just buried on YouTube. It was this absolutely brilliant thing that was on a platform that was completely inappropriate for it, and I was spending I can't remember how much I was spending, like £3 per individual episode to watch it. And it just wasn't the best place for it. But if it's coming to Netflix, that that to me, I think if you're involved with Cobra Kai, I think probably the news that it's coming to Netflix is more important than the fact that they're doing a third season.
The number of people that are going to see it now.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that YouTube, as you say, has a huge audience, but that's not what they're known for. People don't go, oh, I'm going to watch something original. I really want to watch a cool show. Where do I go? They go to one of the streamers. They don't go to YouTube. So bringing it to Netflix, which is arguably the biggest, seems like a very wise move. And if it does well for season 3, which I think it will, you're likely to get seasons 4 and 5 because they're both relatively short. And they don't have massive special effects and probably not huge budgets either compared to a lot of other shows on there. So I'm really excited to see this. I'm probably going to watch season 1 or 2 again because it's so much easier than getting a free month on YouTube Plus or whatever it was so that I could watch it and then cancel it straight away.
Yeah, that's brilliant news. Yeah, I'm so pleased for them because it was such a great show, or is such a great show that it really deserves a much broader audience than I'm confident it probably got on YouTube. Yeah,
absolutely. So, do you have any more news?
Yeah, so this is a bizarre piece of news that I probably, again, my news is characterized
all weird
this month by me mentioning things that probably only I care about. So I've just finished, and this is something that I wouldn't normally read, but I've read a spin-off novel from the Star Trek Picard TV series. So it's by Una McCormack. Mm-hmm. Yes, called The Last Best Hope, which is a brilliant episode title because it kind of almost ties into Babylon 5, where we talked about The Last Best Hope. And it's about Picard and Raffi and Dr. Jurati and all sorts of people like that. It's about kind of the build-up to the things that we see in Star Trek Picard.
Right.
And the thing that Una McCormack does really, really well is when I was watching the show, there was things about it that didn't really make sense to me. And she kind of manages to write them in such a way that all of a sudden it makes loads more sense. And I suspect probably I kind of want to give her credit for that because I'm guessing that actually these things probably weren't thought about sufficiently deeply for them to be a reasonable explanation for them. Whereas she's actually, after the fact, thought about all of these things really deeply, and so much more about the TV show makes sense now that I've read it. So I just thought it was a brilliant piece of work from her.
Does it overlap with the show at all?
No. So it's all about how we end up with the state of affairs that we see before the show has started.
Right.
So it's all about how Picard ended up leaving the Enterprise and how he met Raffi and how he was instrumental in helping the Romulans settle on these other worlds.
Yeah.
And why there's like data-like androids in the Utopia Planitia shipyards, which is never really adequately explained in the TV show.
Nope.
As far as I can remember. So it's all about the build-up for that. It's all about the build-up to that and his fall from grace and all of these other things. But it makes so much sense. And I think I think she did a brilliant job because she was making sense of things that probably not a whole lot of thought had been put into them in the first place.
Yeah. You wonder how much world building was done and how much she added to it then with the novel. That would be interesting to find out. I've seen she's been interviewed on a couple of other podcasts actually recently. So maybe she's spoken about that on them with this new book. I might have to have a listen.
Yeah, I've heard the name. I've heard her name before, but as far as I can remember, I've never read anything written by her. But she did a brilliant job. She really did.
She's done a few Star Trek novels in the past. I know that she's done a few others for the Next Generation, I think, and DS9. But I'd have to look back through her catalogue. Right, another bit of news from me. I can't really avoid it, but the whole cinema debacle with the ongoing pandemic and what's happening with it. Films are being pushed back and pushed back. And a film that I know we were both keen to see, which is Tenet by Christopher Nolan, was pushed back and then it was delayed. And now something unusual has happened with it. Given that there's been a surge of the virus in America, which is obviously where the film was going to be released first, they're now looking at releasing the film in other countries ahead of the USA and doing it on a staggered basis.
Wow, that's really interesting. So I actually had Tenet news, but yours is clearly more up to date than mine, because the last I heard was that it was just getting delayed indefinitely, whereas now it looks like they've relaxed that slightly and we're going to get to see it.
So this is only from yesterday, the news from yesterday, showing that it was going to be July and then they pushed it back, and now they're saying it'll go out first overseas, where cinemas have reopened in many European and Asian countries and have begun to reopen in China. And then if the situation improves in the United States, it should arrive there, perhaps in September. But if not, it could be much later. The situation is very fluid. So obviously they do a US launch and then come over to, overseas, as they say, or foreign territories. But now it looks like it's going to go the other way, simply because of the state of America in terms of how the pandemic's being handled over there, and it's not safe to have cinemas open, but they want to get the film out rather than pushing it back another year. Like I know Marvel's Black Widow was pushed to 2021. They didn't want it. Originally it was going to be August, and then I think they pushed it to November this year, and then they've just said, no, we're pushing it back another 12 months. So that's not coming out in 2020 at all, but they seem keen to get this out. And it's the kind of film you really need to see in a cinema. I know you can have great surround sound at home, and I know you can have massive screens, but it's the collective experience of going to the cinema with a group of people who don't know the film, reacting all together. That's part of the joy of the cinema, not the crunchy, stinky snacks. It's the, communal feel of seeing the film. That's what I really enjoy about it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And for a long time, it seemed like Christopher Nolan was going to be the post-lockdown savior of cinema because of this. Yeah, it seemed like it was going to be an absolutely huge thing. So I appreciate the fact that they're delaying it in order to make sure that it goes on at the cinema, rather than just them caving and saying, "Oh, we'll just stick it on streaming."
Well, they did that with the Tom Hanks film Greyhound. That was Apple got that somehow, and whilst it's done very well for them and people are watching it and enjoying it, it is not the same experience as watching it in your home on your big TV as it would have been of seeing that. I mean, that's a big film, a big World War II film, I believe. So I guess we'll keep an eye out and see when Tenet's going to come out here, and then depending on how the situation goes in America, it may open a few months later there. But it's a watch this space because the situation is fluid, as they say.
Yeah, I was watching a YouTube video yesterday. Yeah, where somebody had cut together interviews with the stars of Tenet, where they were all basically saying stuff along the lines of, "Yeah, I'm in it. I have no idea what it's about."
Wow.
Like they were just presumably doing a brilliant job of delivering their lines, but just couldn't quite work out what was happening to the film.
So having been in it, they still don't really know.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Impressive, but
I'm so excited about this. I can't remember the last time I was this excited about seeing something at the cinema.
Blade Runner 2049 for me.
Yeah,
last time. And June,
I think you're right.
I'm desperate to see June, but there again, I want to see that in the cinema. I do not want to see that the first time at home on TV. I'm hoping. I mean, that's in theory going to be released later this year. I think the first part. But if they bumped it to next year, I wouldn't mind. I'd rather they did that than it come out and it's a flop because nobody would go and see it.
Yeah,
because they're locked in. It's another one that you should see on the big screen. But anyway, do you have any more news? I've got one last bit if you have.
I've got a bizarre, again, continuing the niche theme.
Yep, go on.
So something that I've been doing during lockdown is that I've been playing lots of computer games. So for the first time ever, I played all the way through Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3.
Oh, I've done that.
Absolutely superb.
To carry a character over.
Games.
Did you do that?
No, I didn't actually. And
what?
It was so I wanted to, and I played them all on the same computer, but it just didn't quite seem to be working for some reason.
Oh, gutted.
So yeah, I just didn't bother. But it was such a brilliant series of games, and I know that the end of the third one is famously bad. But kind of the fact that the fact that people were saying the end of the third one is terrible, I thought it was fine. It didn't bother me at all.
Yeah, me neither.
But a game that I've just started playing yesterday is Hideo Kojima's game after he was sacked from the company that let him do the Metal Gear Solid games.
Right.
So it's Death Stranding. And it's very, very weird, as those people that know Hideo Kojima would be expecting. But it's got an absolutely all-star cast. So the main character, the graphics in it are absolutely incredible, like bordering on photorealistic.
Yeah.
But the main character is played by Norman Reedus.
Oh, wow.
Mads Mikkelsen is in it a lot. A major role, bizarrely, is played by Guillermo del Toro,
really?
who I never thought was an actor.
No,
I've only ever thought of him as a director, but he's in it acting as a character, as one of the main characters in the computer game.
Weird.
Lindsay Wagner is in it. It's got an absolutely all-star cast, but completely nuts and insane. But it's so far, I'm really loving it.
I've been playing a bit more Fallout 76, and they've introduced NPCs into the world now. Right. I went into one place, and a character started talking to me, and I went, "That's Jason Mewes. What's he doing there?" And it was him. Yeah, I looked it up. I was like, "Oh, that's right. Yeah." And he's an NPC in that. I'm like, I didn't know he did voiceover work for games. So he was there doing that. But it's amazing. People, Nathan Fillion has famously done a few games. He's done the voices in characters for Halo and a bunch of other things, I'm sure. Did he do... what else has he done? He's done a couple of other ones, I know, but it's amazing. Yeah, voiceover work. They don't have to have any hair and makeup. They can just turn up and record the lines, It's there for years. I have one bit of news which we've kind of touched on in really, it was just something to talk about briefly. And this is the power of the new streamings services, whether it's Netflix, Amazon, Apple, or someone else. I think it was 2 years ago, we had Triple Frontier film that came out with an all-star cast, Oscar Isaacs, Pedro Pascal, Ben Affleck, Charlie Hunnam. And there's 2 films that Netflix have announced that are coming up. So the Russo brothers are going to direct Chris Evans and Ryan Gosling in a film called The Grey Man. So that's huge with the Russo brothers and 2 very big stars. And then the next film that Netflix have announced is Julia Roberts and Denzel Washington, a star thriller, Leave the World Behind. I mean, that's where we are today. That's what's happening.
That's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't know if the films will be released in the cinema because it's the early days on those 2 films, and then they'll be out almost the same time at the streaming service, or they're just going to go straight to Netflix. I don't know. But it's kind of amazing that that's where we are with these huge companies.
Yeah, I don't know the numbers because I don't really care about them, but they must be rolling in cash, presumably, if they can afford to pay for all these films.
With such big names and big directors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Washington. Wow. It's just incredible. A few years ago, I never would have thought that's where we'd be. But recently Netflix released a big list of their most popular films. Did you see this with numbers attached for the first time?
I did. So I can't remember a lot of what was in there, but the most popular films were round about the 100 million views mark, weren't they? I think
the Extraction film with is Nibs who plays Thor.
Oh, Thor, yeah, I can't. Chris Hemsworth. Chris Hemsworth, Extraction, and some of the other ones, and seem to be very popular, doing very well.
filmed internationally, shot internationally, appealing to an international audience. That seems to be the key thing as well. But yeah, they're going guns blazing, and they're doing Extraction 2 because it was so popular, and a bunch of the other ones. The Marky Mark one, Spencer Confidential, has done fairly well, so that'll probably get a sequel, even though it wasn't very good and it was panned by the critics. They don't really care. If the numbers are there, Netflix are happy, people are watching, so they're going to carry on. But yeah, it's very different from where it was. A few years ago, we would have said the best content was on TV, and a lot of big actors were doing TV shows that we never thought we'd see, probably 15, 20 years ago. And now it seems like the best films in TV are on the streaming services, and that's where all of the stars are going for the same reason, because they're not constricted by 22 episodes or even 13 episodes. If they want to do 7 episodes and one's 20 minutes and the next one's 40 minutes, they can do it. Why not? There's no ad breaks, there's no this, there's no that. It's completely open, and it's changed everything. And they're desperate for content because they've got such a global audience. So very different world again. It just makes me wonder what's coming next.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I remember reading something, this is going back several years ago now, where Netflix was just streaming other people's stuff. And it was some interview with one of the head honchos in Netflix where they were saying, the long-term plan is for us to start producing our own stuff and putting them on the platform.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, that's a terrible idea. That's never going to work. And that's yet another piece of evidence that explains why I'm not a multimillionaire, because there are so many ideas now that when I first heard them, I thought that's a terrible idea, and then a year later, somebody is a billionaire off the back of that idea.
Yeah, they've done very, very well, and seem to be growing all the time. I don't know. I think Netflix is the biggest, but obviously Amazon has a lot of financial backing behind them. So they're doing big shows with TV and big films as well. But I think Netflix is doing more original things I've seen. But I don't know. Are you on Apple as well? Have you watched anything on there? Because I haven't.
I'm not, but I can't think of a single thing on there that I want to watch. And I'm sure there's some brilliant things on there, but I just, off the top of my head, I can't think of a single thing.
Yeah. There's nothing that's made me go, oh, I must get a month and try it and see what's on there.
And it's not,
future, but,
and it's kind of, with, Netflix is fine, Amazon is fine. I think the breaking point for me is going for a third service.
Yes.
Where it starts to, one of the appeals of these things was that, you don't need a Sky subscription anymore, and you're not paying for tons of stuff that you don't want. And actually, adding the third service kind of feels like where it's starting to get to the point where it's costing the same amount as a Sky subscription, and you're adding to the percentage of things that you're never going to be interested in watching.
Yep.
Compared to the tiny, the 1 or 2 new shows that you're buying it for, it's a law of diminishing returns, in my opinion. And I think 2 services is fine, especially because with Amazon I get Prime, and so I don't have to pay delivery on things, and stuff comes the next day.
Yeah.
But the cut off from interestingly, I'm arguing that I would never go for a third streaming service. I've got Disney Plus.
Do you watch much on there?
I don't. So it was one of those things where the first month that we had it, we smashed it and watched almost nothing else.
Mandalorian and stuff.
Yeah, but actually, the fact that I'd completely forgotten the fact that we had it.
Yep.
is an indication of the amount of time that we spend watching it now.
Maybe time to cancel that one.
Yeah.
If you can't even think of anything you want to watch on there, maybe that was the time.
I still haven't watched something that we both have in common, I think.
Yeah.
Is that I still haven't bothered to watch The Rise of Skywalker.
I have seen it now.
Have you?
Yeah.
So what did you think?
Awful. It's 2 and a bit hours or more of my life I'll never get back. It's appalling. You could say, oh, it's got moments and this, that. Yeah, it has. Sure. Great. So is episode 1. The lightsaber fight in episode 1. Brilliant. Phantom Menace. Fantastic. The rest of the film, garbage. This film, some good moments. Yeah. Generally, if regarding it as a film, awful. As at the end of a trilogy, appallingly bad. Absolutely shocking. It was almost like they were playing past the parcel in the worst possible way when they did that new trilogy. And it's absolute garbage. So I've watched it once, and that was more than enough for me. Move on. Mandalorian, 1,000 times better. They've got other stuff they're talking about coming up that's not connected to kind of ongoing Skywalker saga. That interests me more than revisiting any of these stories. So don't bother. I'd save your breath and save your time.
Yeah, I've got no intention of watching, and I hasten to add, I'm not watching it out of protest, or to be edgy, or to make a point, or that I hate Star Wars. I just have genuinely just lost interest in it. I just can't. It's something that I just don't have the strength. Given that we were talking about Netflix and Amazon Prime and YouTube and all this other stuff, there's just higher priorities for things if I want to sit down and watch something, and that it just isn't on my radar at all.
Fair enough. Right, shall we move on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, welcome back. So a few weeks ago, Pete Rogers posted on our little WhatsApp group that Zavvi were doing this incredible deal on DC graphic novels, and I think you could buy 10 for £25.
Yes.
And not being an expert on DC, I put out there, what do people think I should get? And the list was so compelling that I ended up buying 20. So I've got a massive pile of graphic novels right behind me for me to read through. And actually, I'm super excited that I've got them, and I'm going to get to experience these amazing things and read through them. It's actually, I'm more excited about that than I am about my Netflix subscription, for example. But one of the things that we're aiming to do, because people sort of suggested these so strongly, is to actually, for us to talk about some of them, and to have sort of special guests to come on and talk about them. And so the first one that I read was Kingdom Come, which is 2 trades, but it's only 4 issues. So each trade was sort of 2 issues. And this was a recommendation that you made, Steve. So obviously that was my highest priority to get onto that one. And we just thought we'd spend a little bit of time talking about it. So one question for you, if that's okay, just to start with, is I understand that this is an Elseworlds story. And can you explain, clearly not for my benefit, but for the benefit of everybody at home, what Elseworlds means?
An Elseworlds story in terms of DC Comics is where you have the original version of something. So Superman crashes in Kansas, raised on a farm, grows up to become Superman. An Elseworld version of that would be, what if he didn't land in Kansas? What if instead of landing in America, the pod landed in Russia and then he's raised in the Soviet Union? So it's like an alternate what-if story. And there is a story that, as I've just described that one, it's called Red Sun. So instead of being born in America, he's born and raised in Russia.
Nice.
So they've stopped using the brand Elseworlds, I think, but this Kingdom Come originally started in 1996, and I've got the original versions.
Wow.
So it wasn't published in 2 trades of you've got, because you've got the kind of hardback collected version.
Yeah.
It was originally done in a very European style, which was exceptionally rare for DC, and it's still rare to this day. And given that this was published in 96, it shows you how little that's changed. So each comic is it's kind of soft trade paperback, but they're only about 45 pages each. And so you had 4 of them, and they came out every 2 or 3 or 4 months over a period of almost a year. And I think we had to wait slightly longer for the 4th one, but it wasn't much. And I started reading this when I was in America during a working holiday in 1996. We went to a local comic shop in Vermont. I saw this. I thought, oh, brilliant. I love the artist. I love the writer. They're both favorites. I picked it up and I absolutely fell in love with it. And to this day, it's still one of my favorite DC comics and probably series ever, because I'm a hardcore DC Comics fan, and I have been. It's who I grew up with. And this was just the icing on the cake for me.
Wow, brilliant. And that makes so much sense, because actually this is a comic that has loads of kind of the top tier DC heroes in. So Superman is, I would say, is sort of the main character, but we've got Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman,
yep,
Green Lantern. But it's set in a time where that's sort of way off in the future. From like we normally think of these as sort of working superheroes, whereas this is kind of, I don't know, it kind of feels like, I don't know what the timescale is exactly, but it kind of feels like 20 years later than we normally like think of these characters.
They never get too specific on it, but you can see how the fact that Batman has aged, Superman has aged a bit, he's got grey in his hair, Wonder Woman looks a bit older, and time has moved on in terms of there's all the children of the superheroes, and then some of them have had children. So there's kind of 3 or 4 generations of heroes and villains running around now. But yeah, about 20, 25 years, I would say, on from this kind of stories that we're used to reading in DC.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that it's so you were saying it came out in 1996, but
yes,
it kind of feels something. It kind of, the way that it's written and what it's about kind of feels like something that's very relevant today. It almost feels like it's more relevant to today than it would have been in 96 when it first came out. Like in 96, it would have been a great story. But actually, if I didn't know it came out in 96, I would have thought it was much, much more modern. And it kind of had an axe to grind, which is fine.
Yeah. But it's Alex Ross art. It's him at his best. I mean, he's still producing art to this day, and his art is absolutely timeless. It's amazing. And the story has a very kind of mythic feel to it. Lots of mythology that's woven into the story to do with gods and superheroes and how we view those with power and all that sort of stuff. And that's kind of a story that's pretty timeless. People and power. Nothing's really changed in the 25 years since it was produced, or, you could go back another 50 years and the story's still very apt.
Yeah, but something that's really interesting about it is you're right, the superheroes that we're following and that we know so well haven't changed.
No.
But it's the point of the story is kind of like, actually, it's society that changes. They sort of still remain a constant, but actually what people value in superheroes and where their interests lay has kind of shifted to a different set of other heroes that have got a very different outlook and morality to the ones that we sort of know and love.
Yeah, so perhaps we should set the story up, and we're going to spoil the story as we talk about it. Not every part of it, but if you haven't read this now, I suggest pausing the podcast and coming back later. So as we've said, things have moved on. The story's 20 years on or so, because there was a tragic event where the Joker killed almost 100 people in Metropolis, and Superman went to arrest him. And unfortunately, one of the people who died during this incident was Lois Lane. And Superman was going to arrest him and just have him put in prison and so on. But there's this kind of idea of revolving door, and eventually he'll come back out. Someone else stepped up and killed the Joker and actually did the one thing that Superman would never do. And people sided with him. They sided with this new person who's called Magog, and they it was that thing of, well, Superman's old-fashioned. It's this discussion that comes up now all the time. People talk about Superman and say, oh, he's boring, or they wouldn't want to write Superman because he's too boring. He doesn't do anything, even though he's all-powerful. You know, he never changes. He's very, you know, staid and not apt to today. And it's that thing of, he's the man of yesterday in this story, and the man of today and tomorrow is Magog. And they're saying, no, you know, superheroes should go one step further. And unfortunately, that has rubbed off on the next generation who have no control, who have all this power, no responsibility, no respect for anybody, and they just fight each other for fun. They're these kids that are spun out of control. The world is their playground, and they don't worry about collateral damage or who they hurt. They just want to fight each other. It's like a game to them.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I grew like we all did really. I grew up on Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman, and it kind of forms your. They all sort of form your thinking about this is what a superhero is and this is what a superhero should be. But actually, somebody could come in with the label of superheroes and have a completely different set of principles and morals that they live by. Mm-hmm. And this is exactly what's happened in this comic, that you know the era of Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman has kind of passed, and you know Superman is in Kansas and is essentially retired, maintaining his own farm, whereas actually there's this other new generation of superheroes that are actually kind of in it for the kicks and for a laugh, and they're not as morally grounded as the superheroes that we think of.
Yes, yeah. And the story begins with an old man dying in hospital, warning his pastor about a vision he's had of a terrible future that's coming. There are a lot of Easter eggs in this book, I should say, that if you're not up on DC and you read it, you probably won't get all of them. So did you know who the old man was dying in the first couple of pages?
No, I didn't. I've probably looked it up, but I can't remember.
So he's the old school Golden Age Sandman. He's called Wesley. Right. And he's warning the Norman McKay, who's his pastor, that he's had a terrible vision of Armageddon and there's future coming and it's really going to be bad. And of course, Norman just thinks he's an old man who's lost his marbles a bit, but he warns him that something is coming. And looking at it now, you can step back and say he could see this is what was going to happen, that the kids were spinning out of control and that something awful was going to come. And he saw it ahead of time, and we tried to warn people, but nobody would listen because he's a crazy old man. Who's going to believe him? And they don't listen, of course.
Yes, and actually talking about sort of nods to things, probably the last big discussion that we had about a DC comic was Mr. Miracle, yes, where Darkseid is mentioned a lot in Mr. Miracle.
Yep.
And Darkseid is also mentioned in this. So I wouldn't say he's a major character, but he's referred to a fair amount in this. And that definitely made me think a lot about Mr. Miracle again.
Well, he's in the book as well, of course. Mm-hmm. In this one, later on. I don't know if you saw him.
I think I did.
So when they set up the Gulag, they create this impenetrable prison that no one can break out of because it's controlled by somebody who's the master of traps to keep people in, scot-free, Mr. Miracle. So he's the one-man prison warden who's helped build them, create this fortress. So he is in it, but he's not in his uniform, his costume. He's just a guy with a beard. So you see him controlling, the system and stuff. But see, there's things like that all the way through. It's brilliant. Yeah. Brilliant. But I just love the fact that the old guard return to bring order to the youngsters. And even though they see that they're out of date and people think that they're no longer suitable to today's morals, and it's a case of they're more relevant than ever before. The children have lost their way. They need this control and they need the discipline. And like they say, they need Superman to lead the charge. And this is the first time we've seen this costume that they've done with the kind of black behind the red S. And that's something that's been carried through into other comics over the last 25 years. So DC have taken that version of Superman and used him many times since. And it was all based upon Kingdom Come, and other things have come out of this, I should say.
Yeah, it was a brilliant comic, and I genuinely, it was interesting to see kind of this alternate morality displayed and how they react to it. And actually, with kind of the exception of Batman, actually the way that they react to it is by just disappearing from humanity, and then sort of coming back or being persuaded to come back and actually starting to kind of impose this new morality again a little bit. Is a really, really interesting take on the whole superhero mythology that we know so well.
Yeah, and there's so many clever bits in the story, like the fact that you've got this old version of all of the evil villains, if you like, sat around a table plotting and planning, and you've got old Lex Luthor and Catwoman and all the rest of it, and they've got their own enforcer who was Captain Marvel. Unfortunately, there's slight confusion in that Marvel Comics have a character called Ms. Marvel, who they then changed to Captain Marvel, and they already had that at DC, so DC changed his name to Shazam in the last, 10 years. But this predates it. This is going back to 96. And so for the 50-odd years before that, Captain Marvel was Billy Batson, who's a boy who was given powers by the wizard Shazam, and by speaking his name, he's imbued with the power of several Greek gods that spell out Shazam. And he's featured in this in a very tricky role, a very kind of critical part of the story, and the fact that Superman says to him at one point, "You know better than anybody else. You're the one who can make the decision because you're both human and superhuman. You're both, and you live in both worlds," where Clark has to say, I'm not. I try to be human, but I'm not. So you get to decide at this critical point in the story. I mean, first time I read that, I was absolutely blown away by it. It was just incredible. And the artwork, it's unparalleled. He's just so good. He's so good, Alex Ross. His painted artwork. I've got a print on my wall of something that he did, because his original art goes for thousands of dollars. There's no way you could afford anything original.
Yeah, the artwork is insane, right? Like it was like typical superhero comics. The art, I love superhero comic artwork, and it's great. I really like it, but it's clearly done in such a way where they can pump out pages at volume because they have to.
Yeah.
Whereas this is every panel is a painting, and it doesn't seem possible that somebody can do that over that number of pages.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous that somebody can do that good a job at doing that. I just don't like. I can't draw anyway, so anybody being able to do it is beyond me. But how somebody can do it like he does it, is doubly beyond me. It's incredible. Every single panel is a painting, which is ridiculous.
Yeah. I loved it how in the story they've evolved the characters on 20 years as well, so they haven't really stood still. So they look and say, what was Hawkman doing in 20 years? What's Green Lantern doing 20 years on? What's Batman doing? And the way he polices Gotham City, because physically he's no longer able to do it. He has to wear a kind of slight exoskeleton because all of his joints are knackered. After fighting with hand to hand for so long, his body's busted up. You've got the Flash, who basically never stops running, ever. He polices the entire city by himself. And he's just constant blur of motion. I love that. It's so clever. And it's just all these little things that they've littered in and moved the story on. And my favorite character from DC is the Martian Manhunter, who makes a very brief appearance in this. A kind of blink and you miss it thing. And I love the relationship between Norman and the Spectre, who's another one of my favorite DC characters, and the fact that they're the kind of silent witnesses, and Norman is acting as the Spectre's moral guide and his conscience. And he says, okay, I'm going to take you around, and when it's time to act, you're going to help me decide upon that date and what I should do. I mean, the painting of the spectres when he just comes through the wall in the church. As you say, it's one panel, but it's absolutely breathtaking. It's unbelievable. It's so good, so good.
Yeah, just an it's just incredible. You can just open to a random page, and it's absolutely a work of art. It's amazing.
Was there anything that didn't make sense, or anything that you didn't understand in the story?
So the thing that I struggled with, and I suspect it was, I didn't dislike it, but I didn't really particularly understand why it was necessary. Okay. And you're going to tell me this is your favourite bit. And it was the whole story completely depended upon this. I kind of felt like it would have managed to stand without the pastor and the person being given these visions. Like, I didn't dislike that bit, but actually all of those scenes kind of, I think the story would have stood just with Superman, Batman and Wonder Woman sort of going through what they were going through without this kind of external sort of narrator sort of permeating through the whole thing.
I think it was necessary only in that they kind of tell you at the very beginning what's coming, because Wesley warns Norman and tells him about the vision. Mm-hmm. And then later in the story, the Flash is moving so fast, he can see Norman. Even though he thinks he's untouchable, the Flash catches him. And then he's now become the prophet because he speaks the same words to Superman that Wesley spoke to him about what he's seen and what's coming. And then the critical moment that Norman has to be in the story is towards the end, because he reminds Clark, not Superman, he reminds Clark of who he is and the choices he's made, and the fact that humans, what it means to be scared, what it means to be human. And he acts as his conscience in a moment where he's so angry that he's just seeing red and he just wants to destroy. And so Norman has to be there to remind him about faith, hope, love, and the meaning of right and wrong. And he says, you've known it all your life. You've always known. You were taught by your parents, and this is why. So that's the reason he has to be there, because if he hadn't done that, the worst would have happened. And Superman would have made a terrible choice that would have made him as bad as Magog, who he despised, despite the fact that the public chose him over Superman.
So interestingly, another thing that I don't think we've touched upon is actually there's lots of humour in this. In lots of places. And the thing that stood out for me as being, I genuinely found really funny, especially because nowadays that of course this would happen. That there was, because of all the superheroes, they now have like chains of superhero themed restaurants. Where they have dishes on the menu that are named after catchphrases from these superheroes and stuff like that. And
awful.
And actually, we have our superheroes that the world thinks they've kind of just disappeared off the radar, that go in, meet up at one of these restaurants, and it's awful, but at the same time, it feels realistic and grounded, and it's very funny at the same time as well. Yeah,
the commercialization of superheroes, we have it in our world, and so he's brought it into that world. And the fact that you have these themed diners and all of these serving people are dressed as superheroes in cheesy costumes, and it's so tacky. And yet go to Disneyland and you can have your breakfast with Mickey Mouse. It's the equivalent of that. Lunch with Goofy and dinner with God knows who else. That's what
it's worse than that, though, because Marvel is now a Disney property. You can go to Disneyland and be greeted by Spider-Man. And
there you go. Have lunch with Captain America and dinner with Nick Fury if you want. Yeah. But they did this 25 years ago. They brought this into this world and said, look, this is where it's got to, and this is where it's become. There are a couple of bits of trivia for you. Norman McKay, the person that it's based on, is Alex Ross's father at the time. So that's who the likeness was painted of.
Cool.
And some of the others, he tends to take pictures of people that he knows and the actors models for him, and then he bases that to create the paintings. As I mentioned, the Black Superman costume came into the comics. Magog, for a while, was a character that also appeared in DC Comics. He's not been in for a few years, but it was a few years after this that they sort of brought him in. Just as, back in the day, Harley Quinn started off in the animated series, invented her. Paul Dini and Bruce Timm created her, and she was so popular that she crossed over into the comics, and she's been a popular comic book character for 20 plus years.
Cool.
So these Elseworlds stories aren't necessarily one and done. They often produce spin-offs or characters that cross over from one place to the next. And obviously Mark Waid knows his DC history a billion times better than me. I'm good at it. He's incredible. He knows everything. Right. There's touches all the way through in here. There's little things like blink and you miss it. They name someone called Ted, and then you show him holding a little gadget, and I go, okay, I know that. That's Blue Beetle. But if you don't know, it doesn't really matter. But if you're a DC fan like me, it means everything. And there's lots of those sprinkled all the way through this thing.
Cool.
It's so, so good. The other thing is, you got an epilogue that I never saw until years later.
Oh, interesting. So I obviously read the whole thing.
Yes.
But I didn't fully appreciate that was tacked onto the end of it. It completely just fell apart of the story to me.
The epilogue in the diner.
Yes. Now you've mentioned it, I understood instantly what you meant by the epilogue. But actually, it just seemed to fit perfectly with the rest of the story and made the whole thing better, in my opinion.
So originally, it finishes with Norman in church talking to his congregation. That's where the story originally ended. And I've got the 4 kind of smaller softback collections. But when they brought out as one combined hardback thing, they put in the epilogue. So it was sort of a year later, I think, that I read it and thought, oh, okay, all right, that's interesting. And they've just kept it that way in print ever since. So my version's never had that. I don't know. Maybe people just thought, he'd done the pages, or there wasn't room if they originally only sort of be 45 pages for the 4 single, versions. So maybe they thought in a collection it doesn't matter; they can add in the extra pages.
Oh, it fits perfectly.
Yeah,
it's a brilliant ending to it. It really is.
I really liked it.
Cool.
So you enjoyed this first recommendation then?
Yeah, it was great.
Not quite challenged Scott, but almost.
Yeah, almost. Well, it's kind of like an Uber challenge, Scott. In that I ended up with 20 graphic novels.
Yeah, keep you busy for a little while.
Yeah.
Why not?
It will keep us, given that we record one of these a month, or we aim to record one of these a month.
Yeah.
We've got years. I'm sitting on top of a year's worth of episodes.
Brilliant. Yeah. You see, get guests on. They can talk about some of their favourites. Yeah. Keep you busy for a while. Excellent. Right. So I don't think we spoiled it too badly. If you haven't read Kingdom Come from DC Comics, I highly recommend it. It's one of the best written and drawn Elseworlds stories the DC have ever produced. If you know the history, if you know the characters, you know it as much as I do, you'll absolutely love it. And even though it's 24 years old this year, it is worth reading it today because it has so many echoes with modern times and power and history and so on. So I'd highly recommend it. Right, I guess that's it for this episode. If you want to get in touch with us in all the usual ways, you can email us, you can come onto Facebook group, and don't forget to leave us an iTunes review. Go on to Geek Syndicate. You can support them on Ko-fi. And I guess I'll just say thanks for listening, and it's good night from me.
And it's good night from him.
Good night.
Good night.